One of the most heartbreaking books in all the Bible, very few people even know about, much less have read or studied. It's the book of Hosea. It's a story of a prophet by the name of Hosea and his wife Gomer, and some of the incidents that take place in their life as Hosea is trying to serve God. Before I get started, I want to make a comment though, and that is in the book of James, in chapter 1, the Bible says that God cannot be tempted with evil, neither does he tempt any man with evil. So we need to get that point across early in this study, because the bad things that happen to this family are not things that have been orchestrated or sent there or set up by God. This is the devil working, and they're just paying the consequence of it. In the very first chapter of this book, we're introduced to Gomer, who is a wife to Hosea, but we learn really quick that she's not a good woman. She's not a good wife. In fact, she is an unfaithful wife. And the American Standard in the first or second verse calls her a lady of whoredom. So we know that we're not dealing with someone who is a very righteous or spiritual individual. Now, the reason I brought up the fact that God doesn't tempt individuals with evil is that this did not happen to Hosea because of God. This was going to happen anyway. And God sometimes just uses these situations in order to make his point. And he does that here. And he does it by naming the three children that she has. By the way, and I think I can prove this to you in a moment, I don't think that any of these children are Hosea's. I think that they are children of whoredom, and the Bible talks about that. But it says in verse 2, when Jehovah spoke at first to Hosea, Jehovah said unto him, go and take unto you a wife. Go and take unto you a wife of whoredom and children of whoredom, for the land does commit great whoredom against me. Now, he's not telling Hosea to go and find a woman like that. He's simply saying, go and marry this woman. I don't think that Hosea even knows how this is going to turn out. And after the fact, this is written. But she has three children, and we learn a lot by the names of those children. The first one is found in verse 4. Jehovah said unto him, call his name Jezreel. This is the first of three children. And when we look at that word and we define that word, it means God will scatter. Now, what God is trying to do in this one section of the Old Testament, he's trying to show Israel, I am your husband, you're my unfaithful wife. And this is how you make me feel whenever you do the things that you do, when you turn your back on me. And when we drop down to verse 5, it shall come to pass that day that I will break through. Now, verse 6 says this. Verse 6. Verse 6 said she conceived again and bare a daughter by the name of Laruhamah. Laruhamah is a Hebrew word which means no more mercy. So God is indicating how he is feeling toward this unfaithful relationship. Now, I told you a while ago that I believe that I can prove to you that these children are not Hosea's children, and I will do that by reading out of verse 8 of chapter 1. And Jehovah said, now she's had this third child, and Jehovah said after she had bore this son, call his name Lo-Ami, which means not my people. That's kind of a dual thing for Hosea, this is not his child. And for God, looking at Israel, and there's a comparison, and God's comparing Israel with Gomer. Now, it gets to the point that Hosea's taken all that he wants to take, and so he puts her away. God comes and talks to Hosea and said, go and get her again. Well, Hosea don't want to do that, but eventually he does, and he pays less than half the price of a common slave in order to get her back in his house. So when we read this out of this first chapter, we see how heartbreaking and how sad that it is that God is dealing with an unfaithful nation, just like Hosea is dealing with an unfaithful wife. Now, if you'll turn over to verse 11, there's another metaphor that God uses, and that metaphor is found in chapter 11 and verse 1. He said, when Israel was a child, then I loved him, and I called my son out of Egypt. There's a couple of references there. The Exodus obviously is part of this, but also there is a reference there to the New Testament where when Herod and the threat to baby Jesus was over with, God said, I called my son out of Egypt. But listen to what he said. The more the prophets called them, the more they went from them. They sacrificed unto Balaam and burned incense to the graven images. Yet I taught Ephraim to walk, and I took him up on my arms, but they knew not that I healed them. And I drew them with bands of love. And he's just going through and saying, Israel doesn't understand. I raised him as a child when he was helpless. I had my arms around him. I was doing everything that I could in order to keep him where he needed to be, keep him in good health, keep him with good nutrition and all that. And he said, Israel just can't see, just cannot see what I've done. And really by their actions, they really don't care. So to me, that's the most heartbreaking book that is in all the Bible. It is Israel as an unfaithful wife, and you can just imagine how God felt about that. How would you feel if your spouse was unfaithful to you? Well, then you know how God felt. How would you feel if you raised a child and you did everything that you could to provide for that child, only for it to grow up and turn its back on you? If that happens, then you know how God feels. So it's a heartbreaking book, but it is a book that hits us right in the face with the situation of this is how we hurt God when we do these things. Well, I hope you enjoyed the lesson today.